Welcome to Empire and Expansion and Progressivism. We're going to do this in two videos, so this one's going to be Empire and Expansion. As last we left, the United States of America, we're doing okay. I mean, relatively speaking. Stock market's going up and people are getting wealthy. Of course, still getting poor, but things are doing okay. And so, well, what are we going to do? We're going to start looking. We're going to start looking out into the world, because as last we left, we were pretty much keeping to ourselves. But no, we're going to start looking around, and so we have a couple guys who are going to try to push this. Here at the bottom, we have this book written by this dude, Captain Alfred Maine. He's going to talk about sea power, and he's going to talk about how the United States of America, we got potential. We've got potential. Then we've got this dude, the Reverend Josiah Strong, who's going to say, hey now, we need to go out and Christianize the world. Manifest Destiny, we went from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, and yay for America! And now we need to expand Christianity to the rest of everywhere. Now we've got to be careful, though, when we start looking at these guys and we start delving into their backgrounds. For example, the Reverend Josiah Strong, a couple of his quotes make you go, ugh. For example, over here he says, this is the Reverend Strong, he says, quote, "It seems to me that God, with infinite wisdom and skill, is training the Anglo-Saxons for an hour sure to come in the world's future, the final competition of races, for which the Anglo-Saxon is being schooled. Whether the extinction of inferior races seems to the reader sad or otherwise, it certainly appears probable." Oh, okay, I understand. He's a racist. All right, let's see. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, you can read this. We've got to be careful with these guys. Be careful with these guys. Looking, got to go you start looking through their dirty laundry. Secretary of State James G. Blair. Let's see. Proposes a policy. We're going to start expanding our influence down into Latin America. Now remember, we had the Monroe Doctrine, which basically said, "Hey, Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere's business, because if you don't, we're not going to like it, and we're going to tell you we're not going to like it." Here we're going to start expanding the big sister policy. Big brother, big sister, the big sister. So we're going to sponsor the first Pan-American Conference in 1889. Pan-America, so Pan means all. So everywhere from the tip all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, all the way up to the tip of Canada. Point Barrow, Alaska, I guess that's about as far north as you can go. Well, it doesn't matter. In 1889, April 22nd, 1889, land run. Oh, look at that. See, it's all kind of the same time period. We do have issues, though. There's border disputes with Venezuela. There's issues with British Guyana. And interestingly enough, we are going to start making some deals with Britain. We're going to call this the Great Rapprochement. Ooh, that sounds kind of cool. The Great Rapprochement, which basically says United States and Great Britain, they're going to start looking at each other across the pond, and they're going to say to themselves, we should really be friends. We speak the same language. We have the same general idea of democracy. We have similar ideas with regard to spreading the faith. We have similar ideas, and we work well together, and mercantilism. Maybe we should really be friends. Now, of course, England was the last country we were at war with way back in 1812, but maybe we should be friends. Now, we can look at this and say that, is England saying this because they are starting to look across the North Sea at Germany, which Germany is going to start getting... what's coming, right? And so maybe England's looking over here going, it sure would be nice if those guys who over on the other side of the pond who speak English could make sure they speak our language. It is interesting that and I'm going to paraphrase this, Otto von Bismarck, who was the leader of Germany at the very end of the 19th century in the 1800s, I think around 1898, he said something to the effect of, the most important thing that's going to happen in the 20th century, the most important factor in the 20th century coming up is that the North Americans speak English. That's an interesting quote, right? That the German leader started to look down into the future and say, hey, you know, those Americans, they speak English just like the English do. And that may come back and bite us later. Hey, look at that. It did, 1917, you know, World War I. Okay, the Great Rapprochement. Hawaii, right? Hawaii. You knew it was coming. So let's see, the history of Hawaii in 3 minutes-ish. Hawaii, way out there in the middle of nowhere. English captain, British captain James Cook gets credit for being the first European on the islands. Now Spain claims that they showed up, let's see, so James Cook showed up, what, in the 1770s-ish. The Spanish claim that they showed up in 1550s, so 200 years before, but Spain can't quite prove that because of different maps and different longitude issues. But they didn't actually land on the islands. The first European guy to land on the island was James Cook and his crew. And there you go. So he's going to claim the British islands for, or he's going to claim the Hawaii as the but he's going to claim the Hawaiian Islands for the country of Britain. He's going to name them the Sandwich Islands, actually. And there you go. So Hawaii is a kingdom at that time, and they're going to have let's see, King Kamehameha and his family lineage are going to go from the 1700s all the way up to the 1890s. And Queen Liliuokalani is going to be the last monarch of Hawaii. So what happens between point A and point B? Well, here's what happens. Hawaii, really nice growing season, and we're talking about sugar cane. Hawaiian sugar cane. So once they start having a good sugar cane growing out there, then of course that attracts people out there because sugar. What can you make from sugar? Let's see, you can make candy from sugar, and you can make alcohol from sugar. So that obviously attracts people from California, and they're going to start trying to make trade deals with Hawaii. Now, in 1887, there's going to be some people who are going to try to some Americans who are going to go to Hawaii, and they're going to start infiltrating Hawaii, and they're going to start trying to take control. They're going to have a constitution in 1887 that they're going to try to pass, which basically says if you're a white American, you can vote, and if you're a native Hawaiian, you can't in Hawaii. So it's going to get all convoluted. Most important thing coming out of that in 1887 was that the United States made a deal with Hawaii with regard to the sugar trade, and they said, hey, Hawaii, we would appreciate you not selling sugar to any other country, just us, and for 7 years, you can trade with us tax-free. Hey, tax-free, right? So the Hawaiians are like, yes! Wait, what do we have to give you? And the United States of America said, well, you know, we would love to have a small little chunk, you know, so we can maybe put some ships out there. Hey, there's this nice little harbor out there called Pearl Harbor. We'd love to, you know, own that. And so Hawaii agreed to that. And so there you go. We established a naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, based on the Treaty of 1887. And then over the next several years, Queen Liliuokalani, it's and or other regents are going to try to establish that Hawaii is a kingdom, Hawaii is a kingdom, Hawaii is a kingdom, and they're going to eventually get overthrown basically by American planters and American businessmen. In 1893, President Cleveland, Hawaii becomes a protectorate, so not a official territory yet, but a protectorate, and President Cleveland says, well, we don't want to actually annex Hawaii for various reasons, mostly because the Hawaiians don't like us, because we're doing this to them. All right, so Hawaii. Anything else? Cuba. Cuba is just, 90 miles south of the Florida Keys, so it's not that far away from us. And so Cuba is owned by Spain and in the 1890s, and all the way back to the early 1500s. But Cuba. Yeah, this is on a Friday. I'm just, right, okay. Stay with me, I got this. So Cuba, owned by Spain. They've been owned by Spain for 400 years at this point, ish. And so the Cubans are sick and tired of this. The Cubans want to overthrow their evil Spanish overlords. And so how do you do that? They burn sugarcane fields, which the plan there is that Spain is making money from the sugarcane fields in Cuba. The sugar caners, the farmers, if they burn their fields, Spain doesn't make money off that. And the idea is, if Spain is going to lose money from Cuba, they'll just give Cuba their independence and let them founder themselves. Or Spain's going to come in and drop the hammer. Oh, right, which is actually what happened. So Spain comes in, rounds up the insurrectos, which are from Spanish point of view, the bad guys who are causing all the problems, and they're going to put them into camps. Yep, start putting people in camps. Here we go. Let's see, in 1896, our Congress, United States Congress, is going to get into the act and say, hey, Spain, we would really appreciate it if you did not put people in camps. Please stop doing that, and please be nice to the Cuban people. There you go. Now, we didn't go to war over that. Not yet. We didn't go to war over that. So here's a political cartoon of the Spanish lady and Spanish misrule, and so the idea of jumping out of the pot is a great, because you're going to get fried if you're in the pot, but if you jump out of the pot or the pan there, you jump into the fire. And the fire says anarchy in it. So what's it better, to be fried or to be immolated? There's a word there. And then down here we have the Spanish melodrama. The evil Spaniard in his cape, and the girl who represents Cuba, and she's holding on to the Don Quixote-esque character of the United States of America, Uncle Sam there, and he's in his tights, and she's pleading with the United States to defend her from the evil Spaniard. All right. We talked last week a little bit about William Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, the yellow journalism, and so the idea of fake news and trying to get people to believe either left or right, and pushing headlines that are misleading and putting in drawings that are instead of photographs, or quoting experts that may or may not exist. So yellow journalism. And so these two are going to help push us into war with Spain. Now, one of the biggest catalysts, I think you can argue, is the USS Maine. So, the explosion of the USS Maine. So, the USS Maine was a top-of-the-line battleship. Its sister ship, the USS Texas, I believe, they were commissioned, and they were going to go out, and they were going to be the greatest of all time battleships out there, cutting edge. Well, it took them 7 years to get built, and by the time they were built, they were actually way behind the curve. They were basically pieces of junk. USS Maine is going to get sent down to the harbor down in Havana, Cuba, to watch after the interests of U.S. interests down there in Havana, and just to kind of be down there to watch people. So, let's see, was that February 15th? Do I have the date up there? Oh, look at that, I do. February 15th, 1898, at 9 o'clock in the evening. Boom! The USS Maine sank. Big explosion. 260 soldiers died. In the middle of the harbor in Havana, Cuba. It must be the evil Spanish who did that. Well, right. So the U.S. is going to send a investigatory team down there, and they're going to make some preliminary findings. And well, there might have been evidence that the explosion was caused from outside the hull of the ship, and so therefore it had to be a Spanish mine. And so the evil Spanish blew up our ship. And so when that preliminary data came out, Hearst and Pulitzer, oh my goodness, they're going to run with this. They are going to spend the next week, just spend tons and tons and tons of copy in their newspapers exploiting this and talking smack about the Spanish. Okay, well there you go, the evil Spanish. And so the rallying cry of remember the Maine became the rallying cry, and people wear these little buttons that have the ship of the Maine on them, and remember the Maine. Oh yeah, so then the Spanish, they also had an investigation. It turns out their investigation said that inside the USS Maine, down in the boiler room basically, some of the U.S. soldiers made some mistakes with regard to opening and closing doors, or however that works out, and there was a spark, and that spark ignited a flame, and that flame ignited powder kegs, 4 or 5 rooms of powder kegs, and so it was actually an accident. It just happened. It was an accident. So the explosion happened inside the ship. Well, that was the Spanish version of the investigation, the initial investigation. Interestingly enough, the Spanish investigation, that didn't make the newspapers here in the United States of America. Somehow it just didn't make it. So there you go. And when people are reading that the evil Spanish sank our ship, now here we are looking at hindsight, actually just couple of years after this event and after the Spanish-American War, more and more details came out with regard to the investigations, and most likely, it's interesting enough, it's still being debated, but I mean, nobody was, right. Most likely the Spanish version is correct. Had it been a mine or a torpedo on the outside of the ship, there would have been a giant, according to witnesses, according to the science, there would have been a giant plume of water. There would have been dead fish in the water, and other interesting clues that did not come about. So there you go. The fate of the USS Maine, just for funsies, is that, of course, it sank. And there it is. It's about to go under. It sank. And it stayed at the bottom of the harbor for many years. The problem is that it was kind of taking up room, because you can't have a large boat come into the harbor if the main's down at the bottom and you can't go, and it'll scrape the keel. And so eventually, after everything was settled, the war was settled and everything, they raised up the Maine. They built a cofferdam and brought the Maine back up and patched it up, and then they took it out several miles out into the ocean and then sank it again, because that's what we do. Okay, they took the mast of the Maine, and the mast of the Maine is currently at Arlington National Cemetery. Do we need to go talk any more about this boat? Okay, let's move on. Spain agrees to American demands of ending reconstruction camps and signing an armistice with the insurrectionists. So an armistice is not a peace treaty, it's just we're going to put down our guns. American public still wants war, mostly because of Hearst and Pulitzer pushing us into war. President McKinley feels pressured into asking Congress to declare war. The president cannot declare war, Congress declares war, and does so in April of 1889. And then the Teller Amendment on top of that says, hey, when the U.S. beats Spain, because we're going to beat Spain, the Cubans are going to be free and independent people. I laugh on it because I know it's coming. Hey, speaking of yellow journalism, you like these? Well, let's see. Over here we've got when the U.S. Senator went down to Cuba and saw the poor children out there. The Spanish are starving them to death, and these kids are dying by the hundreds. There's no pictures of these kids, but there's drawings of very emaciated kids. And then you've got this drawing where the evil Spanish are coming aboard American ships, and they're searching people, and the women, they're derobing the women to search them, and that's just an invasion of privacy, and now just these evil Spanish people. And then you have this, probably the most famous of the book cartoons in this group. You have the Spaniard talking to Uncle Sam, and you notice the Spaniard in his hand behind his back has a bloody knife. He has a bloody knife, and then between them there's the sinking of the USS Maine, and so the Spaniard's about to stab Uncle Sam in the back, and we must declare war. So we do declare war. There's actually several parts of this war. Spain is a colonial power, right? So Spain has been colonizing the world for several years, ever since 1492, yeah? And so they went over and way back in the 1500s, they collected the Philippines. Do I say anything more about that? No. So the Spanish owned the Philippines, and so the United States, when we declare war, we're going to go big. Not only are we going to fight them, we're not only going to fight them in Cuba, but we're going to fight the Spanish in the Philippines. And so we have Admiral Dewey is going to take his ships over to the Philippines and go into Manila Bay, and we're going to have a pretty big victory. Even though Dewey's fleet is a smaller fleet, we are an updated fleet, and so when you have nice iron ships or steel ships, and you're fighting wooden ships, yeah, it's pretty nice to be the king. So the Philippines, let's see, in April of 1898, captured Manila, and there you go. Now, interestingly enough, you look at Philippines, and if you think about the globe and how far the Philippines are around, all the way around the other side of the world from our point of view, not quite halfway between San Francisco and the Philippines. Oh, Hawaii. Oh, look at that, Hawaii. So now we got to do something about that. So we are going to officially annex Hawaii in July of 1898, and we're going to incorporate them as a territory. So it's no longer the Kingdom of Hawaii that we are protecting. It is now officially a territory of the United States of America. Back in Cuba, things are not going well for the Spanish. Spain sends a fleet of ships to Cuba, but the American fleet stops them, and so the Spanish on the island don't get any reinforcements. We have the Spain's fleet is destroyed in July of 1898, and Spain is going to sign an armistice in August of 1898. Now, one of the more popular, biggest press releases, most covered by journalists with regard to the war, are the Rough Riders here. So the Rough Riders, led by a doctor, American doctor, Colonel Wood, and his Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt. So what happened was that the president said, "Hey, I sure would love about 125,000 guys, 125,000 guys to volunteer to form a company. We're going to call it it was the First Cavalry, and we're going to go down there and we're going to smack Spain around. And there were a lot of people who volunteered to go do this. Well, you think about this. When was the last war that there's always going to be guys who want to go out and shoot people. Oh, yeah, that's sure. And so, when was the last time they got to shoot people? Oh, the Civil War. That was 30 years ago. So we have a whole generation. So a whole bunch of people from the territory of Nevada and the Indian Territory, and for that matter, Oklahoma Territory, which were at this time they were two different places because we hadn't put them together yet. Anyway, and from Texas, and a whole bunch of outlaws and for that matter, Native Americans. They're going to respond and they're going to say, yes, we want to be part of this group. And then ultimately, when Teddy Roosevelt joins, now he's from New York City or from New York, and he's going to encourage others to join. And so when he joins, he's very young and he's kind of cool, and so people are like, oh, Roosevelt's going? Oh yeah. And so a whole bunch of college kids sign up as well. So they're going to form ultimately when Roosevelt takes over as commander, they're going to form what's known as the Rough Riders. And their big famous thing here is the charge up San Juan Hill. So what's going on here? The Rough Riders, who are going to be trained in Texas, they're going to be and southern United States. They're going to be trained on horseback, right? Because they're the cavalry. Cavalry. They're the cavalry. Calvary is the hill with Jesus. Cavalry is on horseback. So they're trained on horseback, and everything's going great, and everything's going good. And then they get on boats, and they're going to go to Cuba. And yeah, it turns out there's not enough room for horses on the boats. So these guys have been training on cavalry, now have to be infantry. And there's a big difference between riding on a horse with 70 pounds of gear and walking with 70 pounds of gear. And so they're not very, very happy about this. Ultimately, Roosevelt is going to he's going to be in one group under the command of some other guys, and they're like, okay, Roosevelt, we want your group to be at the bottom of this hill and basically stop people from running off, and we're going to just start shelling with artillery. We're going to start killing the Spanish. And Roosevelt, he puts his troops where he's told to, and it turns out that's not the best spot for them because the Spanish can shoot them. And so Roosevelt goes to another guy and goes to one of the commanders and says, hey, I think it would be better if we just charge the hill. And then the commander goes, I don't know, I don't think that's a good idea. And Roosevelt looks at the guy's stripes on his shirt, and Roosevelt realizes he has more stripes than that guy. And Roosevelt's like, oh wait, I'm in command here in this little group. I'm going to make that decision. So he goes and his group charges up the hill. And it wasn't much of a big deal. Roosevelt's group was overwhelming with regard to numbers and guns. But it makes for a good story, the charging of San Juan Hill, and there you go. So at the end of this battle, and then the cleanup battles, Roosevelt's ultimately going to come back and be declared a hero in the United States. He's going to run for governor, become governor of New York in 1898, the end of 1898, or 1899, and then just a year later, he's going to become the vice president, and then ultimately, very quickly after that, he's going to become president of the United States. So, you want to become president of the United States? Charge up a hill. We're going to sign the peace treaty with Spain in 1899. And so, what does the United States get out of that? We get the island of Guam, we get the Philippines, we get Puerto Rico, and Cuba gets its independence. Did I say the Philippines? I think I did. We are going to play the game, and I've told you this before. We're going to play the game. We're going to get the Philippines, but we're going to pay Spain $20 million. And we just beat them in a war. We're going to pay them $20 million to get the Philippine Islands. And the argument is, no, we got the Philippine Islands for free because we beat them, but we're paying for the roads and the hospitals and the buildings that Spain built on the island. Okay. President McKinley wants to Christianize the indigenous Filipinos. I think that's an interesting idea there. He wants to Christianize the indigenous Filipinos. Well, Spain has owned the Philippines for, at this point, 350 years. In Spain, they Christianize people. Why haven't they done it yet? Oh, maybe because the Filipinos don't want to be Christianized. I'm sure it'll all work out in the end. Anti-Expansionist League has a kerfluffle over acquiring Philippines. Kerfluffle, yeah. And expansionists argue that America has the white man's burden. And we'll talk about that in a second. Here we have the pretty famous political cartoon, the United States of America, and you see its wings, the wings of the bird. Oh, we are sheltering all of these wonderful places that we now basically own. So you have Manila, and you have all those other islands, and Guam and Puerto Rico on the far side. And then down here we have the expansion of the United States. The expansion of the United States. In 1763, we were this cute little kid down there, and you start looking at the dates, and then I'm sorry, what did I say? 63? I meant 83. In 1783, a little bit of America, and then 1803 we expanded, right? Let's see, what was that? The Louisiana Purchase, and then the War of 1812, and then the Civil War, 1861, and then 1898. Here we go. We're starting to get a little chubbier because we're starting to add things. And then 1899, we're going to start adding more things. And then I wonder if the United States ever slims down. No, I don't wonder, I know, but I guess I wonder if you wonder if the United States ever slims down. I know you're sitting here thinking, I'll read it. It says, civilization begins at home. And you have the President of the United States looking at a map of, it looks like the Philippine Islands, but then you have Lady Liberty pulling back the curtain and saying, hey boss, actually here in the United States we've got dead people hanging from trees, we've got all of this awful stuff going on, and you're worried about what's going on the other side of the world. No, this was not drawn in 2021. This was drawn back in 1898. We're almost done with this video. I think we got one or two little slides here. All right, let's go back to Cuba. Let's go back to Puerto Rico. The Foraker Act in 1900. Puerto Ricans are given I'll just read it. Given a marginal stake in choosing their government leaders, United States federal laws were in effect. Governor and the cabinet is appointed by the President of the United States. We're going to get the Insular Cases. So the Insular Cases, the Supreme Court of the United States, it's a series of cases, there's 4, 5, 6, 20 of them, that talk about the laws, the Constitution, and the laws of the federal government and how they're applied to territories. So the territory of Puerto Rico, the territory of Hawaii, the territory of Guam. And if you're a territory, are you a citizen? If you live in a territory, are you a citizen of the United States? Well, yes and no. And that's what the Supreme Court is going to say. They're going to make different rulings. They're going to say ultimately that we have incorporated territories and unincorporated territories. The difference is that an incorporated territory is a territory that's going to ultimately is on the track to become a state. So for example, Hawaii is going to be an incorporated territory because it's going to become a state. Alaska is an incorporated territory because it's going to become a state. Guam is unincorporated. The Philippines Islands are unincorporated. Puerto Rico, unincorporated. Now what's the difference here? Well, if you're unincorporated territory, then some of the constitutional rights that you think you have under the United States Constitution may not affect you. For example, the right to trial by jury was taken away in Puerto Rico and taken away in the Philippines, but not in Hawaii. Incorporated versus unincorporated. So these are called the Insular Cases. Another example is taxes or tariffs between incorporated territories and the United States versus unincorporated. So from Hawaii, which is incorporated, to California, there's no tariffs because they're basically states. But from Puerto Rico, which is unincorporated, you can put a tariff on Puerto Rico. And that's ultimately going to be taken off because it's Puerto Rico. But the Philippine Islands and Guam, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, in the year 2021, I just looked this up. In the year 2021, do we have any incorporated territory? Now, obviously, we have unincorporated territories because we still have, like Guam and the Marshall Islands and Puerto Rico. Do we have any incorporated territory, which means, again, on the track to become a state? And the answer is, according to Wikipedia, Palmyra Island. Right, Palmyra Island. And everybody's like, oh yeah, Palmyra Island. That's right, I too had to look up where that was. I was like, where's Palmyra Island? It used to be and the first sentence on Wikipedia says, it used to be part of Hawaii. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's over there by Hawaii. Not really. It's like way, way south of Hawaii. It's an interesting article. You might read it. I don't know. The Platt Amendment, 1901. For Cuba to be recognized as an independent nation, because that's what they want, they want to be independent, they will need to sign a treaty with the United States that guarantees, amongst other things, the right of the United States to have a naval base on the island. I mean, that's very generous of us. That if Cuba gives us a small piece of their island and we can put a naval base on it, we will then recognize them as an independent country. That is very generous of us, the United States of America. I mean, just think about that. That's great. We're going to call that Guantanamo Bay. Isn't that interesting that the two naval bases that I've talked about in this video are one Pearl Harbor and the other one is Guantanamo? Right. Some of you are like, so? No. They're going to be important later. They're going to be important. Political cartoon here on the far left. We've got the little bitty kid represented by the Filipino, and then you have the kid here of course you have Uncle Sam, and the kid who's wearing the Uncle Sam costume, but he's just a little kid. His hat says Puerto Rico because, he wants to be the United States. And then Cuba, who's waving his independent flag. It says independence. Kind of looks like the Texas flag. Anyway, Filipinos expected to be given independence like Cuba. That's what they thought. It didn't happen. In 1899, the Filipinos are going to have an insurrection led by Emilio Aguinaldo, and we're going to smack them down. And then William H. Taft says, the little brown brothers. I know. The little brown brothers, we need to assimilate them, kind of like what we did with the Native Americans, the Apple Plan. We need to assimilate the Filipinos and make them more Americanized. Yeah, the Filipinos are not going to enjoy that at all. So, there you go. Oof. Title of the cartoon here is The White Man's Burden. So you have, in the lead, you've got the Great Britain. Okay, so let's see. Kind of at the very top of the mountain, you've got civilization. Civilization. And then on these rocks, it has different words. And the rocks are ignorance, vice, superstition, oppression, barbarism. And then you have Great Britain. And Great Britain, in his basket, he's carrying these uncivilized, these unwashed, these heathen peoples up to civilization. And so in his basket, you have the cartoon representing China, you have cartoon representing India, Pakistan, etc., etc. And so the Great Britain is leading these people to civilization. And then you have behind him the United States of America, and the United States of America, his bag is full of, let's see, we've got, let's see if I can do this backwards. We've got the Filipino, we've got the guy from Cuba, and look at that, Native American. So we have these two guys. The white man's burden. Ooh, that's not politically incorrect at all, is it? Right, all right. Last slide for this one. China. So if you recall from world history, China in 1895, they're going to be smacked around by Japan, and everybody's like, ooh, China's open. Go in there and start doing some crazy stuff. Remember all the opium wars and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, good times with China. So here we have the United States says, Secretary John Hayes says, now wait a second. Everybody, calm down. Give China a chance to breathe. Give them a chance to breathe. Don't everybody rush in at once. And then, again, if you recall from last year, in world history, we have the Boxer Rebellion, and the Chinese boxers, go and kill a couple hundred of foreigners, Europeans, and United States goes, never mind, everybody jump on China at once. That's great. Okay, that is the end of this that's the end of this first one, and I'll be back here in a second or two to talk about the second video and progressivism with Teddy Roosevelt. It's very exciting.